Welcome to Screen Quest, a podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined by Mae Finch
Hello, hello.
and Will Rotondi.
Hey, how are you?
On today's episode, we are going to be talking about The Apartment in our Time Machine episode, where we look at a film that is older than 50 years and talk about it. We will also be drawing a side quest, playing a game. But first, we are checking in with some movies that got pushed due to the ongoing writers and actor strike. Most notably, I think probably Dune 2, as far as this podcast is concerned. But there's been several others, including the new Godzilla. I don't know if it's Times Kong, Cross Kong, X Kong. I'm not really sure, but the new Godzilla Kong film is being pushed. And there's a few others that are in doubt as well, such as I think Wonka, The Color Purple, amongst many, many others. So I think this is relevant to talk about because I know we brought up the strike several times, but I think this is probably where hopefully the people that are striking will gain some traction and momentum as far as the ongoing strike, and where frankly the studios are really going to start to feel it. The content that can't be finished or put out timely, the wallets are where they're going to feel it the most. I have seen some pretty funny tweets and updates specifically about them hire like the studios hiring like a PR disaster like firm to try to like mitigate the message, as well as a breakdown of like what the strike demands are and like what it would mean for the bottom line. And it didn't break 1% of the studios like revenues in any of their cases for like what they're looking for. So all interesting
Wow.
things.
Yeah.
So discuss how do you guys feel about the movie delays and how it kind of pertains to the ongoing strikes?
I mean, I very much support the strikes. I think that having read the demands, they're quite reasonable, and a lot of them are going to set important precedents when it comes to things like AI and how we use that in creative fields. So yeah, I think it's super important. It's happening. We have decades and decades of cinema that we can revisit now. So I'm actually kind of excited to see like old stuff being brought back to kind of like fill those gaps that are happening as a result of the strike. And as sad as I am that Dune is getting pushed back, I was telling the guys before we started recording, it's for me, really. I get to finish the book now. I wasn't going to have time to finish the book. So sorry, it's my fault. I will try to finish that book and get Dune 2 out for you guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement. I think that what they're asking for, I mean, if I was an actor, I don't think it's unreasonable for what they're asking for. I think it was crazy when AI became an issue for like extras to just be able to take their likeness and just basically copy paste into infinity and not pay them for it. I was like, nah, it's a little shisty, don't you think?
Or
like
pay them
even you
peanuts.
guys don't. Yeah, like
Yeah,
you guys,
I mean they're
even
paying
you
them.
guys know that's like bullshit, right? Like, come on.
Yeah.
So just stuff like that where I don't know, it was like the weirdest disconnect. Because I mean AI, and I just say this from working in marketing, like, yeah, AI is there, but AI is a tool. It's not replacing the human element. It's not replacing the essence behind the words that are getting generated or getting edited after the fact or getting created as a different image or modified or whatever it is. I mean, you still need the skill set. So it's a tool. It shouldn't be a replacement. And I just find that it's very unfortunate that this is where that battle has to happen. But I'm also in the same camp where I agree that now is a good time to go back for anybody who's ever said, oh, there's too much content, I'll never have time to watch it. Well, now is the time to go back and watch it, and also support your creatives and tell producers where they can stick it.
Preach.
Yeah, I saw a cheeky little tweet. I'll have to see if I can find out and attribute credit properly. But that was like when the article was posted that they had hired a PR firm like for this. They were like, "Oh, why don't you use AI?"
Burn.
Defend you. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's disappointing, but I think it's something a lot of people, are on board with. Like if this is the result and it um like temporarily, but the greater result is that people get paid what they should be paid. These studios make so much money, particularly the people at the top really like are the ones that typically benefit the most from that. I think the longer the strikes go on, the greater the resentment's going to grow too. So I don't, they're not doing themselves any favors. I don't think with the people that they would work alongside. And it's been kind of disappointing to see the tactics that they've tried to use to get sort of circumvent the solidarity that's going on right now. I'm glad that the people participating can kind of see through that and are speaking loudly about them trying to circumvent those the groups to try to get some, what's the word I'm looking for, division, I guess, amongst all of them. But yeah, I'll take it. Listen, I as both of you pointed out, got plenty to catch up on, so it's fine. It's really disappointing that like at a time where cinema is really kind of coming back in a big way, people are showing up to theaters again and excited that it's got to go down now. But hey, so be it. If that's what it takes. But
Correct
yeah, I
me
think
if
this
I'm
is
wrong, but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
that's okay.
Isn't like A24 able to still do a lot of their work because they did just immediately comply to the demands?
I'd
I
have
thought
to
I heard
check.
that.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
We've kind of shouted them as being unique amongst the studios because they don't operate like a traditional studio does and tend to produce work that hit or miss like is more interesting than the common fare that comes out. Like when I see that logo come across the screen, I get excited. It's like a Pavlovian response for me. I don't know if I'm going to love the film that I'm watching, but I know it's going to be interesting, and probably very different. So I think this is just the first wave of it. The longer this happens, the more these will probably see pushed and a good, like, I think like fuck them is kind of how I feel. Like not the writers and actors to be clear, but like the studio executives that hopefully will suffer more in the long run. I did think it was sort of like just eye rolly that I saw that privately the Netflix powers that be are worried that if they concede on the domestic front, that like some of their international partners are going to want similar things. And it's like that's the worry, huh? Is that like you're going to have to pay fairly across the board. Like I'd seen some interesting things about how they have treated like their partners in like Korea, for example, for hit shows like Squid Games and like sucks, man. It's exploitative, and I think Hollywood always has been to some degree. Just a new type of exploitation with things like AI and them wanting to churn out content for content's sake. Like it's just a very different model than it used to be, where like you made a TV show and you got Nielsen ratings, or you made a film and you had box office receipts and critical success meant a lot. It's not really necessarily the case like anymore. Sad times, but hopefully we have a happy ending. We shall see. And now, my friends, I'm going to draw us a side quest. So hold please. So I do that.
Dun, 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 dun.
All right. So this is going to be a group therapy card where we talk about a film that is best watched with an audience or with a group of friends.
I have one, but it's sort of like it's a weird reason for it. So I'll throw it out there and I'll explain why. And then you can tell me what you think.
I'm gonna bank mine. So I want to hear yours now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. I nominate Titanic.
Tell us, Will. Tell us all about
the
it.
The reason why is so when that movie came out, I remember I don't think I watched it in its entirety until like I started watching it, I think, on an airplane ride. And I don't think I watched it in its entirety until after that. And I couldn't tell you the circumstances about why. I remember it being on an airplane. And there were a lot of people watching it. I mean, this was back when it was all like, you only had so many options for movies to watch, and it was censored, unlike today. So you didn't have to worry about, showing anything too scandalous. And and it was like a lot of different screens that would all pretty much show like just that one movie.
Mhm.
And I think that by the end of it, there were just a bunch of people sitting around like teary-eyed. And I was young enough that I don't think the movies really affected me to the same degree like that. But I just thought it was interesting, like what that must, I mean, because this was not like the traditional sense of sitting in a theater watching this and, everybody's in the dark and you don't really see faces, but to be on a plane and everyone's sort of collectively going through this cathartic experience, that I just thought that was interesting. So that's why I nominate it, because some people are like, this movie really moved me, and other people are like, this movie was really exciting, and then there's just like the cinematic, I don't know where I was going to go with that, but just like the visuals, man, of like, it's James Cameron, so it's big and it's intense. So but yeah, that's why I would nominate that film.
I like
I think
it.
it's good choice.
Thoughts on
I
where you were when you watched it and what you felt.
so the first time I saw that, I was on a date, and I don't know how much of the movie I was paying attention to. I'm just gonna leave it there.
Mhm.
Did see it a couple times in the theaters though, because I think the first time I saw it, I was occupied. But um yeah, like I've given Titanic a lot of like shit over the years, good naturedly, for because like it's been memeified a lot, and it's sort of easy to pick on again, and like good naturally, like never really like seriously. But I think it's an excellent movie that does a lot of things well. It's an adventure film, it's an historical curiosity, it is a romance, and we watched it over the pandemic, I think, and it's been a while since I've seen it. And it is just a genuinely like amazing film that is surprisingly historically accurate in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
specifically to like the ship itself. Like they really recreated a lot of like the look, if you look at photographs of the Titanic, and the actual wreck of the Titanic itself is one of those things I've always been super obsessed with and fascinated by. um Particularly like the search for it and the finding of it. Like I remember watching a documentary in school about it. But I think it's a good movie to watch in a crowd, because there's a lot of catharsis that happens um throughout the film. I think like, and just astonishing moments that like in a crowd setting really pay off. I did
Mhm.
get slapped by my date because my little teenage brain found it quite funny that like one of the last things that Jack says to Rose is like, never let me go, and then as soon as he dies, she shoves him off the raft. And I don't know, it made me laugh. Like, and I was a teenager,
And
and
she
like
slapped you?
oh yeah, like not like like hauled off across the face, but like definitely like
Like the shoulder.
yeah, pretty solid, like shut up, dude. Like it tickled me. And now every time I see that scene, I'm tempted to laugh, like at the memory of me like as a teenager laughing. um so that's my experience with Titanic. I think it was a great choice though, and I was kind of bummed. I think it just came out to cinemas earlier in the year, like for the anniversary, and I missed it, and I'm kind of disappointed that that happened. But say la vie.
Well, my first viewing experience was nowhere near as eventful. I was watching it with my family and I think a couple other friends just on our TV at home when I was pretty young. And I like did not get the romance between Jack and Rose at all. I was like, why is she into him? Like this other guy is giving her necklaces and looks hot. Why is she into this dude?
Billy
Oh boy.
Zane. Oh yeah.
I'm gonna take a stab at knowing you for a while, for about 5 years, that you probably don't still feel that way.
No.
Okay.
But I was like, I don't know, 11 maybe. So yeah.
Mm. He's in the third class, like.
Nice.
So I was mostly just judging Rose for her romantic decisions the whole time. I was not paying attention to the ship or any other details. And then I feel like I watched it again maybe college and like got to appreciate things a lot more, and it was like, oh, this is a good movie. Like has its flaws, but it's overall a good movie. But I would like to actually watch it again now with more of a film interpretation angle and see what I make of it, because I will probably have a wildly different opinion, and I will probably hate all of Rose's love interests this time.
I think it holds up pretty well. Like it's a passion project. I
Yeah.
saw a clip floating around this year because of the anniversary and stuff where it was Bill Paxton talking about when somebody spiked the clam chowder with PCP. Have you guys heard that story?
No.
Vaguely, yeah, yeah.
I encourage you to listen to it in Bill Paxton's own words because it's great. But he was on Larry King Live, and he like so somebody like they had a food truck that would like serve the cast and crew while they were filming in Canada, and somebody spiked the clam chowder with PCP, and like a lot of people were like just tripping balls. Nobody was like permanently like harmed or anything, but it's a really wild story because I never figured out who it was or like what the motivation was, other than maybe just mischief. And
Wow.
Bill Paxton's solution to that, like, and the way he told the story, like, it really made me miss him because he's such a unique actor. And I was like, yep, that's. I feel like you handled it probably the best, and I'll not spoil it for you, but you should look up that. It's like a little 3-minute clip of him telling the story, but it's good
Nice.
times. Well, thank you, Will. It's a great pick.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Appreciate it. R.I.P. Bill Paxton.
R.I.P. Bill Paxton. Amen.
R.I.P.
And now it is time to see what Mr. Rotondi has in store for us with regards to the apartment. So, Will, if you would, sir, guide us through our discussion of the apartment.
It would be my pleasure. So the apartment, which is not to be confused with the 90s romantic thriller that you may Google if you happen to Google the apartment. This one was released back in 1960. And it's Billy Wilder directed. I always want to see Gene Wilder. I apologize if I do by mistake. But Billy Wilder directed film about an insurance clerk whose name is C.C. Baxter, and he's played by Jack Lemmon, who lives in Manhattan and has been trying to basically boost his income as well as his standing at the insurance company that he works for by allowing members of that company's senior management to borrow his apartment for their extramarital affairs. It's basically the worst way to Airbnb that you could think of. But as we quickly find out, he does realize this is problematic, because not only is he trying to hide this from his neighbors and his landlady especially, and also his coworkers, but we find out quickly how easy it is for him to get his schedules mixed up, or that the executives that he lends his apartment to get really pushy about when they can and can't come over, or pressure him at like the middle of the night when they pick up some chick at a bar that maybe they're going to get lucky and that this is a really beautiful lady and I gotta have your apartment right now. And then of course it doesn't help matters when we find out that his boss, who's played by Fred McMurray, who is the character's name is Jeff Sheldrake. When we find out that Sheldrake has also learned about the apartment, and that the girl that Baxter happens to be interested in, named Fran, who's played by Shirley MacLaine, is the girl that Sheldrake is also has been seeing and sees at his apartment. So there's a little bit of a complication there, understandably, for the drama that ensues later. Rather than try and recap the whole film, even though it's not nearly as convoluted as Heat was last week when we talked about that, I'd rather talk about this movie in stages and then ask questions along the way as we go. But before we do that, as always, I'd like to get your general impressions about the film. And May, I'm going to go ahead and just choose you first if you're cool with doing that.
It's fine. I was venting in the podcast group chat, so I offered myself up there, I guess. This is like called a rom-com on like Wikipedia and stuff, but like the com is doing a lot of work. This was very bleak for most of it, I would say. And like I was definitely rooting for Fran and Cece by the end, but not necessarily as a couple, but just for the character growth that they had. And so I guess like it worked in that sense. But yeah, it got very bleak and serious, and Yeah, it just wasn't quite what I was expecting, but it was very good. I appreciated the comedy that was in there was a lot more, I guess, physical and slapstick than I expected, like with the tennis racket and noodles. And just some of the absurdity of the apartment logistics. Like I thought there was a really cool balance of comedy and like suspense full of almost horror too, to that the timing dynamic there with what was going on at the apartment. So yeah, overall I enjoyed it. It just was very dark and I had to like watch some very silly stuff immediately after.
It's true. And it is interesting that it's sort of like, I'm trying to think about what it was. Chris mentioned that I think at one point when he was trying to explain everything everywhere all at once, that the goofiness of that movie is sort of disarming you for the seriousness that's going to hit you later. And I think that it's kind of the same way here too, where we have a film that's set up that it seems like on the outset it's just going to be, like you said, kind of slapstickish. Characters are acting sort of over the top, or in a way that you would almost say, would you really be doing this, just for the sake of the comedy aspect? And then all of a sudden it gets dark with attempted suicide and talking about not just Fran's attempted suicide, but also Cece's experience with thinking about committing suicide before. And it goes in some, even the idea too of like making it deeper than just joking about having an affair, to like the serious repercussions of it and the people who are involved and their emotions, and when people try to manipulate each other. And yeah, so I'm in the same boat. It took me by surprise too. And I think that's why I liked it so much, where I went into it thinking, okay, so just my expectation of a film in this time period being a black and white film and having these actors in it, I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to get out of it. And then it was like, no, this is more than that. And I really like that it is. So I can definitely relate. But Chris, before I talk your ear off a little bit more, tell me what you thought about the film.
I love this movie. I really did. I've seen a lot of Billy Wilder films, and this is a nice little reminder of why he's considered to be one of the greatest like classic Hollywood directors ever. There's just a richness and a timelessness to so many of his films. I don't know if it passed Sunset Boulevard for me, like, but it's close. It's close.
Nice.
That one I really adore because it is about Hollywood, and as we've established many times, any movie that's about Hollywood, like, it always has my interest because I think that's fascinating. But yeah, these characters feel so alive and real and complex, and their motivations are complicated, and their stories are tragic and comical. There's a lot going on, and I kind of appreciated that it wasn't pigeonholed. I really didn't look up too much about this because I wanted to experience it purely, but I was very satisfied by that. I think this is a hard movie to really put in a firm genre. Like if you want to call it a rom-com, as Wikipedia does, that's fine. I don't know that I would classify that. I think there's certainly comedic elements to it, but I think that's a good thing that you can't really pigeonhole the film. It was a trip to see a young Shirley MacLaine, who is brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. She broke my heart on several occasions in the film, and I think it's the best performance in the film by far, although Jack Lemmon's also great in it. But yeah, I really can't speak highly enough of it. I was delighted by it in terms of just how good it was. Maybe not delighted by all the content in the film, but like just how good it was. And this is one that I think that I'll look forward to watching over and over again. It's going to go into the rotation because I thought it was amazing.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. I think that I would encourage anybody too, for those listening, that if you actually haven't seen the film, I mean, I'm assuming you would have before you're listening to us talk about it, but I would encourage anybody who's ever, thought about it too, that if you start the film and you think it's going to be a certain way, to just kind of keep going. And I say that too because my wife started watching it with me, and I think she got a little frustrated with Cece's decision to be such a pushover. and didn't get to the point where it gets deeper than, just sort of the goofiness of it. I mean, that goofiness is still sort of there, and it's important to his character because of what he has to learn from the experience. But yeah, so
Yeah,
just
hit
my
pause.
little
We'll be
disclaimer.
back, or no, we'll be back. We'll wait. Like hit pause, watch it. We'll wait
Yeah,
for you. It's fine.
that's right. The I think for me, just the only other thought to add about general impressions is that I like how, oh, excuse me, I like how it feels like it's a film that's relevant no matter when you watch it. You could tell the same story and you would have people that could relate to it at any point. I mean, because it's basically just the, people that want to please others who do it so much that they're either a pushover or they're naive or they let others take advantage of them, or just the feelings of wanting to connect with people that it's just a problematic relationship, and or just dealing with suicide, which was a surprisingly large portion of the film that I did not see coming. But before all that happens, the film starts out in what's basically, as we've already established, kind of a goofy comedy. Whether it's Baxter, who's kind of bending over backwards to let these executives use his apartment, or tolerates how they speak to him, or watching how those guys, the comments that they have about the women that they're with, who they're trying to hook up with. And even to the point where Baxter gets locked out of his apartment because one of the guys loses his key, and then he's just stuck out in the cold overnight, and then has to try and scramble to reschedule 3 other guys while he's at the office dealing with having a cold and a fever so that he can just have his apartment for one night to get some rest. I'm kind of wondering, sort of like, I guess my first question for this is, when you were watching the film and you came to that point, if you found sort of that lead in to be, I guess, in terms of how your sense of comedy is now, if you found it to be funny, sort of this setup, or if you didn't find it funny, and how you kind of expected the rest of the film at that point to be like. Did you think it was going to kind of continue in that vein, or did you think that maybe there was going to be a little bit something else happen down the line?
Yeah, I thought the themes were pretty mature for the time period. This predates a comedy starring one of Jack Lemmon's frequent co-stars, Walter Matthau,
Yeah.
called A Guide to the or Guide for the Married Man, Guide to the Married Man, A Guide for the Married Man, yes, which is a movie that is kind of similarly about how to have an affair and not get caught. But that's like 67. So for 1960, this quite surprised me. And I think this is on that sort of cusp when you get films like Psycho and things. But it handles a lot pretty deftly. Doesn't really make light of what the affairs are necessarily, but has a little bit of fun with it. The office politics definitely seem of the time, but not
Mm.
necessarily outdated. Like it seems like a little snapshot of, hey, if you wanted to rise through the ranks, hard work was often not enough. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of Mad Men echoes in this for
Mm.
me, of like watching the office interactions and sort of how the men treat the women and how you have to play ball to get ahead. I know I wasn't certainly not bothered by the premise. I thought it was great comedic fodder, and I think that's why the kind of the mid film tragedy or near tragedy is kind of surprising, because watching it, my initial impression was, okay, a lot of the comedy is going to come from the increasing complexity of him trying to juggle all of these, things that are happening, and maybe not let Shirley MacLaine know that he's doing this. And I was completely wrong of where the film was going to go. And I think when a film from this time period can subvert your expectations that greatly, it's a good thing. A
Mm.
lot of the stuff of the time would have been pretty formulaic.
Yeah, I did not see this coming at all. Like, I think one of you two had mentioned it was dark on the last podcast. I was like, I know this has to go south at some point, or something like fairly shocking has to happen. But yeah, I didn't see that coming. I do appreciate the scene itself had like a little bit of a lead in terms of like kind of like showing that she notices the sleeping pills, puts them away, kind of does some other stuff, and then comes back to them. So it, like, I don't know. it's not just like a quick sudden scene and you're like, oh my God, that happened. But yeah, no, definitely a huge tone shift. And yeah, I guess there wasn't a better way to do that really, because like we were talking about, the humor does kind of disarm you and prepare you for the more serious stuff. And it, yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the only kind of prediction you get of this that might happen is that as you learn more and more about Fran, you see that like, oh, this cheery, bubbly, happy-go-lucky, like, she'll make a veiled threat if you slap her ass, but like otherwise won't be too like, aggressive or self-assertive woman is actually like very troubled and sad and has been through a lot. And yeah, so you get a little bit of a hit when you learn more about her backstory right beforehand, but yeah, pretty big tone shift.
Did you find the setup like was still like funny all these years later? So this is 60. I'm terrible at math. This would be like what, 63 years ago, like more or less. Am I doing the math right?
Yeah.
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 Do you feel like it still works, or is it dated for you, May? I'm curious. Like the
No,
setup,
it feels
sorry.
pretty modern, honestly. Like I think the workplace sexual harassment might get treated a bit more sternly these days, but
Yeah.
Yeah, Marianne was like, "Oh, there's no HR," and I was like, "I'm pretty sure personnel is HR. That's the worst part about all this. Like,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
think that's what they used to call HR." But yeah,
They're like, HR is actually the one dancing on the table at the Christmas party right now. So if you want to talk to them about what's permitted, Oh man. Yeah, actually, I think you could play a really good game watching this film and comparing it to like current day office politics and being like, all right, so which of these would get you a red flag? Let's just go through the list of what everybody was okay with in this movie that it's like, yeah, actually, that's a no-no.
You couldn't just go to a random executive's office and smooch in there during the office party.
Yeah, probably not a good idea, not a good look. Yeah. I
hey,
mean, it
and
happened
Die
in Die
Hard.
Hard as well, but like,
Yeah,
yeah, I was gonna
True.
say, but that was also 90s and Coke was involved, so
And some
kind of,
extenuating circumstances.
yeah, terrorists, it happens. But yeah. Well, speaking of actually, that kind of segues into the next question that I sort of had just out of for humor's sake, which was well, I'll kind of tie in a little bit of the narrative that we had leading up to that. So after we get sort of that humorous introduction and sort of the rescheduling that Baxter's trying to do for his apartment, he gets called up to Mr. Sheldrake's office, hoping that he's going to get promoted, and then quickly has a moment of panic when Sheldrake tells him that he's on to Baxter's little apartment thing with the other executives there, and Baxter thinks maybe he's going to get fired or get in trouble, and basically says like, I'm never going to do this again, I'm so sorry. And Sheldrake's like, actually, I could use that place. And sort of just as indirectly as he can, and basically infers, I want to use your apartment, and then offers him tickets to a show in exchange for using it. And then also there's a little exchange where we see Sheldrake on the phone talking to his wife about that he'll be busy with another out of city manager that's coming in that he needs to have dinner with. And so clearly it's established that he's, fooling around on his wife, or fooling around behind his wife's back. And so, yeah, so there's that. It's further complicating his apartment situation. But at this point, we don't really know who that is just yet, although you may or may not have had suspicions leading up to that point. But I think the thing that sort of made me go back and listen to it again was the exchange that after Baxter has this conversation and he gets his new office, he's like over the department that he was in, that he's so excited that he wants to take Fran out to go to the movie. I'm sorry, to go to the theater rather, to go see the show. And when they're talking, and she mentions that she's already got a date, but she'll try and meet him after that. she says something, or he says something about how he knows a lot of information about her because he just happened to see her file. And she laughs it off, and I'm just thinking like, man, back in the
Stalker.
yeah, like there are so many red flags going on with this exchange that it's only okay in this movie in this time period. Like, or maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it's just Hollywood. But I was curious what your thoughts were about that. I know it's just a very sort of brief and it's meant to be lighthearted little exchange, and they're laughing about it. But I'm like, this guy's really pushy. He's also really weird, in that respect. So, any thoughts that you guys had? And since I passed it to Chris last time, May, I'll go ahead and pass it to you now.
Yeah, so like I said, stalker, but also having finished the film, I look at that scene so much differently because in the moment it's like, wow, like she's being very calm around this dude, and then you finish the film and you're like, oh, her stanchions are just like not on the ground, they're subterranean. So she's like, oh, this guy's a bit quirky, but but basically nice to me, and hey, he's not married.
Cleared that bar. Yep. Nice.
So I was like, oh, poor Fred. No, honey.
I love the scene with Sheldrake because I think it does a great job establishing who he is. He kind of toys with Bud like he is some sort of prey and wants to let him know that his career and thus his life to some extent is in his hands. I do think Bud is definitely kind of a homie about the whole thing, dude. He's like, oh, no, this is my place. Sometimes they go in there to change, and plays it off pretty well. But I think there's a great payoff because that scene is sort of echoed later on at the end of the film when he returns the key. So you see Sheldrake trying to reassert his dominance and remind him of who's in charge. So it makes it that much more satisfying to see him have a very different outcome. And I don't want to get too far ahead. As far as all the stuff, basically, I know things as deep as your medical history. I think it's one of the few aspects of the film that doesn't really age particularly well. I don't think that the audience is meant to be alarmed by it. Probably wasn't at the time. Certainly comes off a little bit differently now. But I was willing to chalk that up of like that's part of the times. It's just not, we don't live in the same world. I don't know, maybe 1960s audiences would have thought nothing of that. But we had a chuckle about that, Marianne and I, a little bit of like, Jesus Christ, like anybody in today's society would be bolting for the goddamn door and like calling HR if they were rattling off all these things that they should not know about you.
Yeah.
They do kind of tie it into his love of like stats a little bit. I think it's meant to be, what's the word I'm looking for, verification for the audience of this is kind of how he sees the world, a little impersonal, like I don't think he's intending to be creepy or anything like harmful about it, but yeah.
It does. It was one of those things too where I did sort of a double take, and I had to go back and like put the subtitles on to be like, did I hear exactly what he said clearly? Like, but yeah. And yeah, I imagine so. I mean, could you imagine like trying to tell somebody how you met your significant other, and it's like, oh, well, they said they looked at my personnel file, and I found that really charming. They were that interested in me. So I went on a date.
They did a HIPAA violation, and it was
Yes.
endearing.
It is a bit like that, sorry, slight spoilers for Mad Men, where Don, very early, I think it's like the first season, like has Betty like going to a psychiatrist because he wants to know, well, you don't find out immediately, but you think it's like, okay, he wants her to get some help. And then he's just talking to the psychiatrist like on the phone, like after every session and getting like all the stuff, and nobody has a problem with it. I think, again, indicative of the times a little bit, where doctor-patient confidentiality meant like, well, your husband's privy to everything. You as a woman have no agency. Like, sure, we won't tell your neighbors, but your husband's entitled to know. Wild.
Well, kind of moving on from that scene and questionable pickup tactics. Then we've got we have Baxter, who thinks thinks maybe she'll show up, they'll go and enjoy the show. Then we see that Sheldrake, it's actually Fran that Sheldrake is going to meet up with at a bar that we find out they've been to several times before, and that Fran is having conflicted feelings about meeting with him because she's trying to get over the fact that it's never going to, like, she knows it's never going to work out, and that he's just going to keep putting off trying to supposedly leave his wife, that he doesn't really care for her the way that she does for him. And then Sheldrake wants to just try that one extra little tactic and say that, oh, well, now I've got my lawyer involved, and so I think we can finally make this work. So that helps, I guess, to some extent, pressure her essentially into going with him to Baxter's apartment, which she doesn't know whose apartment it is at that time. And that's where they end up staying. And the next scene that we see is Baxter's just kind of hanging out outside the theater. Everybody else has gone in for the show, and unfortunately she never shows up. We kind of fast forward a bit in the timeline after that. I think it's pretty much up to the Christmas party, because then later we have Baxter talking with Fran and kind of telling her, no hard feelings about not showing up for the theater, that he knew that she had a date before that and it was probably really important. So, he got it. He tried to be overly understanding and, apologetic and all that. And so, but then we do get a little bit of the exchange where he realizes that she was in the apartment with Sheldrake because of the exchange of the mirror, like the compact mirror that she owns, that she inadvertently leaves, that he hands back to Sheldrake later, and that Sheldrake then gives back to her, and that he then finds again later when he's trying on a new hat that he got, that he's talking to Fran about at the office Christmas party. And I think it's interesting in the film, and it's actually the scene, for those who are watching our YouTube video, it's in the scene that's behind me, where we get to see at two different points, you get a reflection of Sheldrake and you get a reflection of Baxter in them looking at the mirror and seeing that it's broken and seeing how it makes their face look. And Fran makes some comment to him about never having it fixed, because I don't know the exact quote, but that it essentially makes her feel the way that she look, or that it makes her look the way that she feels. Sorry. And I was just kind of curious about that, what you thought about the way that it sets that up, and the symbolism behind just sort of all of these characters that are in some ways broken. I mean, whether we're rooting for them to learn from it, or whether we don't like them like we're not supposed to with Sheldrake. Just sort of your thoughts about that setup, and anything that sort of affected you when you were watching that.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the best scene in the film. I think just I love the symbolism of the mirror. I love it as a plot device, and the writing is so good. That line, I think, delivered any other way could have come off as a little hokey or trite, but again, Shirley MacLaine, just absolutely amazing bit of acting. That scene and the restaurant scene that you talked about in the Chinese restaurant were particularly like tough, just because of how well she sells sort of the hopelessness, and when he gives her the hope of the impending divorce that is never to come. It's just as the audience, that it's guy just wants to get laid, so he's going to say whatever it takes to get her back to the apartment. Boy, it's tough but phenomenal stuff. So I loved it. I think the mirror scene in the office where he realizes, and then of course all the things that sort of follow that, is it's amazing. I don't know, it was my favorite scene, I think, in the office, because I was wondering again, like, how are they gonna do this, right? Is he gonna see her coming out of the apartment, like how and it's so much more amazing and tragic than I would have concocted based on, again, my expectations, and the film went right on subverting them. So, great stuff.
Yeah, it's made it especially tragic by the fact that, like, the way the mirror was broken was apparently she threw it at Sheldrake.
Yeah.
So I feel like that, and her line about it and making her look as broken as she feels were kind of our two biggest hints to kind of where her head was at and how bad her mental state was. But yeah, it's sad, and you're right. Like the way Shirley MacLaine delivers it, it does seem like genuinely tragic, not someone just trying to be kind of like emo, which is how it could come off from another actress.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it's a really well done pair of scenes, and I also think it's kind of touching that I don't necessarily know if I support, Baxter and Fran as a couple at the end, but I do think it's touching that Baxter immediately recognizes it's her mirror, whereas Sheldrake doesn't until he sees like that it's cracked and is told multiple times that it was found in the apartment. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess that's hers.
It's a good point too, considering a later scene where he doesn't really know when they're trying to exchange gifts, Sheldrake and Fran at Christmas time, and he doesn't really know. He says that he doesn't know what she would have liked, so he basically just pays her for having met up with him.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Kind of before we jump that far ahead, and I know that for the sake of time, I might gloss over a little bit to get us to the end of the story here. But at that Christmas party, that's where Sheldrake's secretary kind of eavesdrops in and then explains to Fran that she is definitely not the first woman in the office that Sheldrake has tried these lines with. That Sheldrake and she were involved, and like 3 other women that she lists off before her or after her. I can't remember the order. But basically saying that he always tries to schmooze everybody and think that they're important, and that he's just waiting to leave his wife once everything is in the right time, and set aside with the lawyer or whatever the excuse is. And so after that, when they meet up at Baxter's apartment, when it's Sheldrake and Fran, and they're exchanging Christmas gifts after the party, and he mentions to her that now is really not a good time because of the holidays and the kids being in, and they have to put it off some more. She finally just breaks down because she knew it was always going to be that, and just sort of having that be the same situation and feeling unhappy that she keeps making the same decision to hope that maybe it'll work out. We see her, as Mae was talking about, looking at some sleeping pills, and at first you're thinking, okay, well, maybe she's just rummaging through the cabinet, and we don't really think, maybe it's not going to be like anything dire. But once Baxter comes back to his apartment after having gone out to get drunk on Christmas Eve, and pick up what I think is probably one of the funniest women in the movie, just because of just the weird setup. It's this lady who really just wants some action and tells an interesting story about her husband, boyfriend, whoever, who's like locked up in Cuba.
I love all of their bar interactions and how they dance together so awkwardly. It's all perfect.
She reminded me a little bit of Lena Lamont from Singing in the Rain, like with that accent.
Yeah.
Oh my
that
gosh,
sort of
yeah.
unrefined, like, yeah.
That's gorgeous. It's great too. And it is. I mean, it's funny, like some of the lines that she has too about just calling when they get back to the apartment, and her just being like exclaiming that, oh, this is like Snugsville or something. And it's like, man, I'm gonna put that line away for a future, if you're talking about an apartment sometime, right? Just to get the reaction. But when they come back and she's making drinks, Baxter goes in. He notices that some gloves have been left on the table, and he recognizes who they belong to, and he goes to toss them in the bedroom to give back later, and realizes that Fran is still there. And he's upset because at this point he realizes who she's been with, and he doesn't really want to have her around. And so he's just trying to wake her up and give her the same routine that the bartender gave them earlier, which was, it's time to get out.
OUT.
OUT out. Yeah. And she doesn't wake up. And he panics, understandably, because he's like shaking her and she's not waking up. And he sees the bottle of pills, that the entire bottle is empty. And he knows how many pills were in there before. And so he bolts to his neighbor, who's a doctor, and like begs him to come help. Meanwhile, he goes back in and kicks out the lady he picked up. And they're able to to revive her. And for a very large portion of what happens over the next, I don't know how much time it was felt like most of like the second half of the film was them together while she is recovering in his apartment for like the next 48 hours. So I guess I'm going to try for the sake of time and put a couple of questions together on this. While she's in the apartment with him and they're sort of discussing how she's felt about the relationship with Sheldrake, he talks about a time where he thought about killing himself, and that it was a gun that he couldn't figure out how he wanted to do it. And then a cop ended up coming up to approach him, and he panicked and shot himself in the knee. And so she thinks that he's just trying to commiserate with her, and that he's telling a story. But it's interesting how later at the end of the film, we do see a gun that he puts aside when he's packing some things. And I was just curious, a couple of things to ask both of you about, which was, one, what are your thoughts about suicide being depicted in this film? Whether it's about just the fact that it even is for a movie like this at this time, or how it's portrayed, and any thoughts about that. And then my second question is, did you think that he was telling a tall tale, or at that point, in the film at least, or did you think that his story was true? And so, Mae, I'm gonna toss it over to you first.
Yeah. Well, it definitely like came out of left field for me. Like, it was a very layered and thorough like depiction and discussion of suicide, which I appreciated, because there's plenty of movies like this where it's used as like almost a joke, or just kind of like used for shock value without diving into it really. So I appreciated that this did fully dive into it once it came on screen. I thought that it was tasteful they didn't show the actual scene where she took the pills, although I didn't necessarily love the doctor slapping her around scene.
Yeah.
All that felt a bit gratuitous. Yeah, I appreciated that afterwards she got the chance to talk about it and convey that it wasn't just like, oh, girl sad because man married. It's been for her a lifetime of feeling like she would never find love, and that like a huge important part of her life would just never go her way. And especially for a woman of this time era, that has financial repercussions too. And it meant that she had to live with her sister and feel kind of like a spinster and a failure. And all that layer makes her decision seem a lot less crazy and more like, oh, I could see how someone would get depressed and come to this conclusion. So I appreciated that, because a lot of the time it's kind of a like, oh yeah, woman, emotional, of course she would do this thing. So I liked that, and I appreciated Baxter trying to relate. I thought he was being authentic. I think he was trying to tell it in kind of a comedic way just to make it easier to talk about. But the fact that he was like willing to show her that his knee, which would probably have a pretty obvious scar on it, I believe him. I think that was something he went through. And I think Fran's response of questioning if it actually happened means that did mean something for her to hear that like she wasn't alone in feeling that way.
I agree. It's definitely authentic story. I think there's too much detail in it. I love the gun because it's like it's almost like a joke Chekhov's gun at the end of the film.
Yeah.
Where there's sort of a gag with it. Yeah. Or the champagne, is popped. But yeah, I feel like it's definitely an authentic story. I think it really hardens the audience, in case you weren't already completely against Sheldrake. It's one thing to get into an affair as a married man where it's like two consenting adults where they kind of know the deal, so to speak. It's something completely different and even more horrible when you're stringing somebody along with hope, like he's doing. Yeah. I think the first is shitty, the second is even worse, because you don't even have sort of trust and I don't know, like truthfulness going on between the two people. So yeah, it's terrible. I think it is understandable why she does what she does. I think that including the doctor as sort of like this, even though it's like a sternum rub would work just as well. I don't know why you're doing that, but he pulled
Right?
out the smelling salts, and I was like, oh great. And then he was like, wow.
Wham!
Okay, well, but it is an interesting bit of sort of character development, plot development, because he gets to see some of his ideas are reinforced about who Bud is in his private life, but also I think he, for the first time, sees him as a complicated human being. Just the how Baxter, Bud, whatever you want to call him, like handles the situation and the sort of care that he gives her recuperating. And I love his loyalty, I gotta say, to kind of keep her secret guarded all the way throughout the movie. I think it's a very admirable thing that he does, and not really explaining more than he has to as much as he's peering into her personnel file, he's rather guarded, which I think is a very sweet gesture. So even though we kick it off with a tragedy, I think the character development that happens subsequently after that midpoint is some really wonderful stuff, including his story. His suicide story was amazing. It is a little humorous, but also it's nice that they're kind of kindred spirits in that regard, and that they like survived this terrible thing, and he's giving her genuine hope of like, hey, like you can come out of this dark place. There's a way for I've been where you are, versus like, oh, I'm gonna divorce my wife. So she gets hope in two very different ways from two very different men, and one is significantly sweeter than the other.
Yeah.
I just gotta say, with the keeping her secret thing, that did bother me a little, because it's like, okay, but like tell her sister at least, because like she needs help. Like,
Yeah.
True.
Well,
tell
and the
someone.
sister wasn't there. There was just the fucking greaser that shows up with that
Yeah, the
ridiculous.
cabbie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she was like going to call her sister, and like he could
True.
have taken the phone and then like told the sister a slightly altered version
Yeah.
of events. I don't know, but that rubbed me slightly the wrong way, even though it was well intentioned and a very loyal act.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was trying to be loyal to everybody. He was trying to keep everybody's name clean. He was trying not to have anything get out that was going to implicate anybody in anything. And then he was willing to take the fall for everything, and or to have the bad image. And yeah,
I'm
it
gonna
is
ask you,
interesting.
when
Yeah,
he
go
tries to
ahead.
get Sheldrake on the phone to
Yeah.
talk to her, do you think it's about trying to make her feel better, or is he like genuinely trying to patch things up? That scene was a little like hard for me to read in terms of what his motivations were. I couldn't tell if he was just trying to make her feel better, or if he just wanted the status quo. I'd like to think it was trying to make her feel better. Like, hey, he's not a total heartless piece of shit, even though I know he is. Like, just fucking talk to her and tell her that you've thought about her even like once since all this like shit's gone down. But how did you guys read that?
I'm going to go with he was doing it partly to try and mend things up, because he doesn't really know the extent of their history together at that point, even though he's heard it from Sheldrake, and he thinks that he's trying to be reassuring to Fran about it in a weird way. I think it has to do with the fact that it was the girl he really loved before that married his best friend, correct?
Mhm.
So maybe in some weird way he feels like it's happening all over again. Not that Sheldrake is his best friend, but in the same sort of like there is a relationship there that he's trying to maintain. And so I think that it's just trying to keep everything from keeping his arrangement secure about the apartment, but also just trying to make sure that the people that he's doing this on behalf of are okay. So that's at least how I read it.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the loyalty thing, especially his loyalty to like Sheldrake. Like, he has feelings for Fran, but he wants to be loyal to Sheldrake and everyone at the company. And I think he sees the best way to do that to be like being as hands off with Fran as possible and just trying to get everything patched up there. I do think he also hopes it'll make her feel better in a backwards way.
Yeah. And also maybe get her out of his apartment
Yeah,
faster.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess with that in mind, then too, like the rest of the film kind of it sort of wraps up a little bit faster than that. We've got a few additional plot points along the way, like as Chris talked about, Fran's brother-in-law, who's a cabbie, is worried about her, or her sister rather, Fran's sister, is so worried that she, I guess, either asks him, or he is prompted at some point to come and search for her, and goes to the office and finds out from a couple of the executives there that Fran and Baxter haven't been in that day. And because the executives are a little miffed that Baxter stopped allowing them to just borrow his apartment all the time, they decide to basically clue in her brother-in-law to the fact that that's where she's at. And so he shows up, and there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about, is she okay? What happened? Oh, she took sleeping pills. Why? What happened? And then Baxter, of course, trying to, be the loyal one, ends up implicating himself as like the cause of it. So he ends up clocking him, or I should say the cabbie clocks him a couple of times in the face and tells Fran to get her stuff, and they're going to leave. And there's also a little scene between the doctor and Baxter where the doctor's encouraging him to be a human being, which was interesting. But at the end of the film, pretty much the last couple of, I guess, scenes or setups that we see are that Baxter is finally being considered for like an executive assistant role, and he finally decides he's kind of had enough of Sheldrake trying to mooch off of his apartment. Sheldrake's wife has been told that he's been screwing around behind her back, and so he got kicked out of the house, and he's looking to, I guess, actually do stuff with Fran, and Baxter has no interest in having any of that in his place, and so he tells Sheldrake no and returns all of his stuff and quits on the spot. And then we cut to another scene after that where I guess it's New Year's Eve, and Sheldrake and Fran are at the same restaurant at their same table, and he's talking to Fran about what Baxter did, and she has this moment of realization that crosses her face. And so when he turns to see people celebrating, she ends up slipping out, I guess, the back door or the side door or wherever, and goes running to Baxter's apartment to see if he's okay. And as Chris mentioned too, you hear a loud pop, which you're wondering if maybe it's the gun that we saw a few minutes before when Baxter was packing up, but turns out it's just champagne that he's popped. And they sit down and they have a nice little card game together, and he looks over and tells her that he loves her, and that's pretty much where it ends. So I was kind of curious about your thoughts about the end of the film, and then anything else too that you'd like to add before we move on. So Mae, I'll toss it over to you first.
I was really cheering for them both, honestly, in that moment, because you've seen these two people-pleasing folks that like aren't really acting as full humans, right? Like Dr. Dreyfus was kind of right. They were being pushovers the whole movie, and it's hard to get away from being like that. I've had issues with that myself, and it was very cathartic to see them both stand up for themselves in the final act. Don't know if I ship them, but it was kind of nice that they just like met up and started playing cards. So it is left somewhat ambiguous if they're going to have a relationship or just be good friends now. Who knows? But yeah, very proud for both of them for standing up for themselves and choosing to make better lives rather than giving in to despair.
Yep. I'm actually really glad too you mentioned the ambiguity with it, because I think that if they tried to shoehorn in some sort of like, well, now I do care about you sort of thing, I feel like that would have made it hokey. And I appreciated the fact that they didn't do that.
Yeah, Baxter's like, I love you, I adore you. And she's like, just play.
Yeah. Yeah, just shut up and deal. Yeah.
Which has a double entendre, right?
Hey. But yeah. So yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm glad you mentioned that. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I was just glad it didn't end in like a New Year's midnight kiss or some stupid shit like that. Look, I promise I'm not wholly unromantic, but it would have felt a little too tidy. I think it was a great ending because of the ambiguity, and I think you get the sense that whatever happens between the two of them in terms of a friendship, relationship, whatever, that they're going to be a lot happier because they've made some good life choices and gotten away from the most toxic insurance agency of all time.
Ever.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very solid. Again, subverted my expectations, really.
Yeah, if you weren't mad enough at Sheldrick already, this is the guy that sets your premiums.
Hey. Which insurance company was this again?
It was a fake one. It was
Yeah.
very generic. Yeah.
Yes. The Apartment, brought to you by Geico.
Geico, don't sue us.
I know. Sorry, Lizard. Or Gecko. Sorry. Please don't.
Oh, now we're
please
definitely
don't.
getting sued.
I know, right?
Geico's like, you know who should have had renter's insurance? Baxter.
Nice.
Is your apartment a revolving door for for
Yeah,
a bunch of
at the
people trying to
before our feature
man.
presentation, yeah, we're about to watch The Apartment, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Marianne made me laugh because she was like, more like the apartment, more like the fuck pad, am I right?
Hey,
It was like, yeah, Jesus. I really did know that was going to be sort of I thought it was going to be some weird meet cute thing where it's like, oh, they are in the same building or so. I had no idea what this movie was about. So yeah.
This is gross, but I have to say my first thought when I found out that's what the apartment was being used for was it's got to smell bad in there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's true. Man, I never saw that dude do any laundry at any point, and
wash the
that
sheets.
bed, like of anything, dude, like the couch and the bed.
He's going back and sleeping in there, man.
And sometimes he's not even sleeping in it. He gets kicked out again for the next person. Like, dude, bad reviews on Airbnb for this guy. Like, I think the only other thing that sort of stood out to me, and this has no relation to anything we just talked about, was I really like the scene where you see him in his office, his cubicle, or not really even a cubicle. It's just this wide open room. The original open floor plan where there's so many rows of desks and people doing accounting work. And I'm like, there's something about the way that scene is framed that I just think is very entertaining to watch. Just all these different extras doing their stuff. So shout out to extras because we care about you and we don't want you to get replaced.
Quite loud as hell in that building.
Yeah, I know. All those little clickety click 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 on those typewriters and stuff. So
yeah, during that intro, Will, I was thinking, is this just like a predecessor to Office Space? Is that what this is going to be?
Yeah. Yes.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster starts playing.
Michael Bolton.
while he throws the key and goes into a slow-mo.
What is it you say you do here? I'm the guy.
Hey, like that one guy who takes mail from one floor to the other. Like, yeah, he has a purpose. I got keys to exchange. Oh man. All right, guys. Well, anything else before we wrap up the show about The Apartment?
Nope. This is a great film.
Yeah,
thank you for nominating.
You're welcome. And thanks to my mom. Shout out to you for introducing me to this film. All the old films that I was too lazy to ever watch. Thank you for always convincing me to watch them at like anytime I go home, and that's what we catch up on. So definitely have to show some appreciation there.
That's sweet.
And now it is time for a game. And due to the time frame that we've got, I would kind of like to do I'd like to do a game of keyword countdown. But Chris, I also think that your introduction to keyword countdown is the most informative, and I will inadvertently not give credit where credit's due. So please enlighten us as to what it is, and then I will attempt to do one, hopefully as well as you have. But we're going to find out. It might be bumpy.
No worries. So keyword countdown is a original game created by Gavin Murphy, or Gav, as most people know him, of RKG Video. Excuse me. Almost got your company wrong. Sorry, Gab. And it is a game that takes the IMDb plot keywords and essentially has the two people that are playing the guessers try to discern the film based on a least obvious to most obvious countdown of the keywords. So the earlier into the list you guess the keyword, the more points you get. And of course, since they're not ordered on IMDb, it's a little bit subjective for the person that creates the round. But yeah, we'll have a round of films for us, and we'll attempt to guess it based off of the crazy keywords, as Gav would say, from IMDb.com.
Woo!
Sweet.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Gav,
Chris.
for allowing us to play. Yes.
And thank you, Gav, as well. Absolutely. All right. I can't promise it's going to go easy, but I think it's going to be entertaining. And I think that's really what matters at the end of the day. So
Yes.
if you are ready, how many do we need again? This is probably a bad question to ask now, but how many keywords do we need?
I do 10 typically, like per film. So
Nice.
That's yeah. You can, if you want to do like a lightning round, you could shorten that to whatever you want, but
10 is the magic number, and I'm good. So here we go.
fabulous.
First keyword. Human in space, outer space. Sorry, human in outer space. But no need to worry about the inflection of why I'm saying that.
Star Trek, the
Interstellar.
motion picture.
Star Trek the motion picture, man, that would be good. But no. And also Interstellar, you need to see it, Chris, one day.
Gravity.
Nope. All right.
Nothing.
Keyword numero dos. Butt slap. Not to be confused with the movie we just watched.
Butt slap and human in outer space. This sounds like a great movie.
Spaceballs?
Oh, if only. But no.
Event Horizon.
If only, but for other reasons.
I know you love that movie. I've not seen it, so I'm just going off of your knowledge. No, I don't have nothing. Okay.
Any other guesses? Going once, going twice. Keyword number 3. Android.
Star Wars 3? Or sorry, 6?
You got a few to choose from, and no. I'm sorry, Ellie, that's also the incorrect answer.
No.
She's very opinionated today.
She's like, it is Star Wars, you jerk.
Nothing.
Any thoughts, Chris? Nothing. Okay. Number 4. Penal code.
So human in space, butt slap, penal code, Android. Alien 3?
Ooh, good guess, but no.
Yeah.
Elysium?
Also good guess, but no. All right. Number 5. Third arm.
Interesting that follows penal code. I guess that would be third leg anyway.
Oh.
Total Recall?
That would also, I like where your thoughts at, but no.
Okay. Damn. I know that's
Yeah,
a third something else, but
that last one's really throwing me well.
Yep. Okay. Next. Beheading. Choppy chop.
oh gosh.
Can we get a recap?
Sure can. Human in outer space, butt slap, android, penal code, third arm, and beheading.
It's wild.
Dune? The original?
I mean, I could see it. It is David Lynch, but no. Deleted scenes.
Gosh, man. Galaxy Quest?
I like that idea, but no.
Oh, got nothing, my guy.
Next, satire.
Spaceballs again?
Spaceballs 2, the search for more money. No, it's not.
What in the fuck?
Mm-mm.
Oh man.
I haven't seen this, but Starship Troopers?
Oh, you're
Oh
quite
yeah,
right.
on the bounce, but no.
Oh, dude, I was sure you were right, May. Like,
Service guarantees citizenship, but not this one.
Nah, I got nothing, homie.
Cool. Next, kidnapping.
Kidnapping. No.
All right. May, any thoughts? This may or may not, depending on if you've seen it. This may start to veer in the a little bit clearer direction. Highway construction.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Ding 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 ding
Hey,
ding
nice
ding
job.
ding.
It's been a
I
long
haven't seen it,
time
but I
since I've
read
seen
that book.
Yeah, you got it.
Android too. Oh,
Yarp.
yeah.
Yep. Nicely
Well done.
done. Yeah, I kind of figured that would do it. And then you know what? I was just going to give you the hitchhiker as the last clue. So
Nice.
I figured at that point to put you guys out of your collective frustrations if it had come to that. So excellent.
Sorry, I have to ask a question about the movie because I've only read the book. Does the movie have like the little ear fish that translate?
Babelfish.
Yeah, I think
yes.
so. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
That would have
Awesome.
been another good one.
Yeah, that's true. I like that. All right, guys. Well, that's what I got. I don't have anything else. I wanted just like a quick round of it, and I'm glad
that
it
was like a
turned out well.
singular film.
That was a
All
singular
right.
film. That was a one-off. So I think with time, that probably will help us out a little bit too. There, so,
It will.
but yeah,
like
May. So I get we can call that our lightning round if you want to. Or just
Winner.
a quick little one-off.
Take a
but
bow.
Well played.
Great job. Yeah.
Good job
So,
all around. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you guys for playing. Thank you, Gav, again for letting us play the game, and also Chris, your introduction and the joy of giving you guys a round of that. So, and also for your interest in watching The Apartment. So thank you all again. And Chris, back over to you, man, to see what we got going on next week.
Yeah, let's see what it is gonna be next week. Oops, I almost drew another side quest. That would have been fun.
Mix it up.
Oh, let's see. It is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, which is a new category. As a little reminder, that is a category where we will discuss a self-aware film that grapples with social issues via satire, parody, or by breaking the fourth wall. This is going to be a Chris pick. And speaking of films about Hollywood, this is The Player, which is absolutely brilliant. To give you a little sneak peek of what's in store for you, the opening shot is a long take. So a long take is like a long, continuous, uncut shot that is filled with characters talking about their favorite long takes, like in Hollywood films. Like, so strap in. It's a really good movie, though. Robert Altman directed, starring Tim Robbins. Just love this movie because it is about Hollywood and the bullshit of Hollywood business. Really couldn't be a better time to pick this movie, given that we just talked about the strike. I can't wait to hear what you guys think about it. It's got a very stacked cast of amazing actors, directors. Like, it's just very self-referential, and I hope you like it.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this will be my first watch, but just pulling it up on Google, I've definitely seen like some little scenes from this going around social media.
Nice.
Around the writer's strike or just in general?
Just in general.
Yeah.
Like the guy with the greased up hair leaning back in his chair, doing this move. I've seen that.
Oh yeah. I think it is a very timely movie. It's funny because I know probably once again people are going to accuse us of cheating. I think this podcast just is very timely when it comes to how things fall sometimes. But the sort of the surface level story is it's kind of a murder mystery too, which I think May you'll enjoy, that sort of like whodunitness like
Oh yes, I
aspect of it. But it has a lot to say about Hollywood, and who would know better than Robert Altman, who made his bones as like a new Hollywood director, and then sort of had to navigate the all the inner workings of the studio system. So can't wait, guys. Have you seen it before, Will?
No, first time, man. I am looking forward to it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about The Player. And then I believe the following week, no, it'll be 2 weeks after that, we'll be covering The Shining, right? I think we said September 20th is like when that is coming out. So stand by. We got a little bit of time.
I'll take an extra week if you want to give it. I thought it was going to be before that, so I am
we
all
can
for
talk
that.
off mic. We'll figure it out. It's a bit of a birthy book.
Yeah,
For girthy, not birthy. Geez, girthy book. As far as even Stephen King books go, but
it is chunky. Yeah,
it's a little bit chonky, but we appreciate the support. Thanks for hanging out with us while we talk about film once again. You can find us on social media at ScreenQuest Pod, and of course on YouTube as well if you prefer to watch the show wherever you get it. Thank you for your support. We will see you next week. Bye.
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 Did you eat any of the PCP spiked clam chowder from the set of Titanic, and did they ever catch the person responsible?
Yeah, that's kind of a crazy story. I remember I shot the first couple weeks of Titanic. What Jim did, he had me and Gloria Stewart and Susie Amos. We were all up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We were shooting on the Keldysh, which is the Russian research vessel that had the 2 Mir subs that Jim had taken down to Titanic to shoot some footage that he used in the film. While we were shooting that, they were building the big set down in Rosarita Beach. One night, we were shooting splits. We would go in around 5 o'clock, and so we would take our dinner at midnight, and then we'd work till dawn. And I didn't care for the caterer much, so I was ordering my meals in, but I was having a good conversation with Jim Cameron on the set. And I said, Jim, are you going to eat off the truck tonight? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'll join you. So we ladled up the clam chowder, not knowing it was laced with PCP. And I don't know who did it or why, but I remember going back to my trailer after lunch, and Jim went up to his office. And I heard a commotion, and I opened up my door, and I saw a couple of ambulances pulling in, and then an AD ran up and said, are you feeling okay? And I was like, well, I think I'm shooting all night. I'm feeling about as good as you can feel. And he said, well, did you eat the clam chowder? And I thought, well, yeah, I had a couple of bowls. And about that time, I started feeling it. Now I'm starting to witness some bizarre behavior with the crew and stuff. And they take us very close by. We were on the Dartmouth side of Halifax Bay. And so all of a sudden, here's 150 crew members stumbling into the emergency room of a very small hospital at 1 o'clock in the morning. You see some people are freaking out, some people are Congo dancing, some people are euphoric. I knew I was pretty stoned on something pretty bad, and I thought, me and Jim thought that there was a neurotoxin in the clams. We didn't know what it was. We thought maybe the clams had been left out in the sun or whatever. But I figured while they examine all these other 100 people, I said to Jim, I'm not going to hang out here. This is bedlam. I'm going to wander, because it was only a few blocks from the set. I'm going to wander back down and just drink a case of beer, which is what I did. And, that seemed to help me.